Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and few things are more topical than this around central Oklahoma.
Yes, now if we knew what we were talking about, we'd call it seismicity, but we don't, so we're going to call it earthquakes.
I've never used that word in my
Well,
life.
and I haven't either until
Maybe
right
today's
this
the
minute.
day. Maybe I'll get that one out.
We're pleased today to have Austin Holland, the research seismologist for the Oklahoma Geological Survey, come join us and talk to us about what's going on in Oklahoma in the way of earthquakes.
Just about everybody's felt an earthquake by now,
if
in the last couple of years, and of course there's more interest in what's causing them. Are they going to get worse? Is it going to get better? And why now? And so perhaps Austin can shed some light on all of those interesting topics. It's today's show on The Verdict. I hope you'll stay with us.
I've known I was going to be an artist since I was a little kid. I still have teachers that in grade school that still have my artwork. I think I told them something along the lines, this is keep that, it's going to be worth money someday. I'm Justin Mader, I'm an artist, and I'm Chickasaw. My muse is the Muskogean, Mississippian art. When I see that, my mind just fills up with bubbles of ideas. My big thing right now is shell carving, the shell gorgets. My work is refined more and more until I found my own rhythm. I also do metallurgy, where I've been acid etching copper and hammering copper to make a copper repoussé. You only have one chance to do it right, so it requires a lot of planning and thought and just patience. My Chickasaw heritage is the foundation of who I am. It's the roots of where I come from, and it inspires me as an artist and inspires the tenacity of never giving up.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofanation.com.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now. And it starts with Oklahoma.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today we're really pleased to have captured Austin Holland to join us today to talk about Oklahoma quakes. Austin is the research seismologist at the Oklahoma Geological Survey, did his undergraduate work, and at the University of Idaho did his master's work at the University of Texas, El Paso. He's just about, if he can get people assembled, he's just about to finish his PhD in seismology at the University of Arizona. He's was with the Department of Energy for 12 years, and after that he came to Oklahoma with the Geological Survey. He's been in Oklahoma now since 2010. We're really pleased he could give us some time to come and talk to us about a topic that a lot of Oklahomans are talking about.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we could have ignored you a few years back, but suddenly earthquakes are common conversation. And you're with the Oklahoma Geological Survey. I'm going to guess that most people watching the show and most Oklahomans don't have any idea really what that implies.
So the Oklahoma Geological Survey does research and education and outreach regarding groundwater issues, CO2 or carbon sequestration, geothermal energy, petroleum, geology, geologic hazards, geologic mapping throughout the state of Oklahoma. And part of our outreach includes then making this information available to the public and everyone on our website at ogs.ou.edu.
But this is not a new organization.
No, we've been around since statehood. We were crafted in the state constitution, and our mission comes basically right out of the Constitution, and it's still just as applicable today as it was then.
Well, the cynic would say you sit around for 100 years waiting for earthquakes to happen, and then all of a sudden now you guys have gone to work.
Well, our forefathers just planned ahead, that's all. Well, what's going on at the Oklahoma Geological Survey? Tell us what, I know what your mission is, you just told us that, but how many employees do you have? What do you spend your day doing?
So we have a number of geologists and people that build maps and that sort of thing. And so myself and my staff, we spend all our time looking at earthquakes within the state of Oklahoma, tracking those and monitoring and cataloging those as best as possible, and then doing research regarding those earthquakes. But we have geologists that, you know, try to understand geologic formations better and their history and how they were emplaced and that sort of thing. So we have a wide variety of things going on. We have 35 to 50 employees, I'm not sure the exact number, but we run a large core facility too, where companies and different individuals can go in and see formation rock cores that have been brought deep out of the earth from both here in Oklahoma and elsewhere in the country, and they can have those laid out and interact with these rocks. And so that's a service we provide.
My image of the old seismograph, you know, and the little needle that's moving, and all of a sudden an earthquake comes and there's this you know, big gyration. Is that still applicable, or in this digital age, do you even have those types of machinery?
So I've worked a lot with those old helicopters that people are familiar with, the pen going back and forth and making all sorts of noise during an earthquake. Nowadays, everything is all computerized, and I'm kind of glad that we don't have to deal with changing the paper on those things every day, especially on the weekend. But so no, all our data comes in digitally. We use cell modems. Our data is collected out in remote parts of Oklahoma and sent to us via cell modems, or basically cell phones. And that data is then sent to a central computer where we work with it.
Okay, let's say there's an earthquake. Do you know about it without anyone getting on the phone and calling, you know, some sort of first responder, or do you wait for the public's response before you would actually investigate?
No, so we look at all earthquakes, and we see a lot of earthquakes that no one would ever know about. They're far too small to be felt. It depends on where they occur, how small of an earthquake we can see, but we, in some areas, can see earthquakes down below magnitude 0, which is a very small earthquake.
Well, where do you have, I'm just having a tough time visualizing your equipment that tells you that there has been an earthquake. Where do you have equipment? Is it statewide? Do you have a single location that picks up everything around the state? How does that work?
So small earthquakes you have to be right on top of, and to be able to determine depth, you want to be as close to the earthquake as possible. So we have stations sort of scattered throughout the state. And
are they mobile?
Some of them are mobile. Many of them are permanent. We have about 15 permanent stations operating in the state of Oklahoma, and about 17 temporary stations operating in the state. And so what they are is they're sort of like a microphone that you put in the ground. It works a little different in the physics, but it just senses the vibrations that are occurring in the ground and records those and sends them to our central recording system.
But you have the state covered then?
So we are adding 8 more stations to the state to have a more consistent coverage across the state, because right now our best coverage is really in central Oklahoma, sort of from the Texas border all the way up to the Kansas border.
Mick and I appreciate that, by the way.
I remember growing up and hearing that Oklahoma was on you know, at least one fault line, maybe multiple fault lines. It didn't seem very pertinent because we never seemed to have an earthquake that I or anyone I knew felt. But all of a sudden now, you know, we're getting more attention. So tell us about the history of these faults and why there's some activity now that we're sensing.
Well, so we have a lot of major faults within Oklahoma. There's a major fault system that runs along the southern portion of Oklahoma, and then there's another major fault system that runs from that south central sort of location in Oklahoma and sort of parallels I-35 up all the way through north to the Kansas border. It goes on into Kansas and all the way up into Nebraska. And that's the Nemaha Ridge. It has a lot of large secondary structures associated with it as well. So we also have a lot of faults off these main faults. And so we know that we can have these earthquakes occurring both on some of these major faults, but then off them on secondary faults It doesn't take a very large fault to create an earthquake large enough to be felt by you or I or residents right on top of it.
So these plates are shifting? How much are they actually shifting to create a force that we could feel at ground level?
So a centimeter to a couple centimeters. The Prague earthquake, I can't remember what the, sort of the average offset would be for like the magnitude 5.6 earthquake, but it wasn't more than a couple inches of actual offset for the average over the whole area of the fault.
Now, see, that doesn't sound all that scary, that something moves a couple of inches. We ought to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, so the couple inch ones aren't scary. It's the kind of earthquakes we know we can have in Oklahoma. About 1,300 years ago, we had a magnitude 7 earthquake, and we know this from the geologic record, on the Mears Fault in southwestern Oklahoma. And that one had much larger offsets. So the average over the whole length might have been half a meter or so, a foot and a half to 2 feet. And there were areas where we had more than 3 feet of movement on the fault. That's a big deal.
Yeah, well, so let me perhaps display some ignorance, but if there's a lot of little subtle movements that create small earthquakes, is that actually good because it keeps one big one from occurring?
The problem is there's so much energy in the larger earthquakes that you just can't remove all the energy or that motion with small earthquakes. So for instance, a magnitude 7 earthquake is 1,000 times more powerful than a magnitude 5. So we'd have to have more than 1,000 earthquakes to magnitude 5 earthquakes to equal that 1.7. So that the small earthquakes don't get us very far along that road.
We're able to, with some degree of reliability, predict tornadoes. We're able to predict snowstorms, weather events, sometimes wars, sometimes other kinds of events. But nobody seems to, at least publicly, have an idea about how in the world you ever predict when we're going to have an earthquake. In California, they're saying, we know we're due for a barn burner of an earthquake because it's time. In fact, it's past time. And we know it's going to happen. It's 100% sure it's going to happen. We don't have the foggiest idea when it's going to be. Is there any science, any research going on to allow predictability to occur?
Yeah, and so that's a real challenge because we can't see inside the Earth as well as we can see what's going on in the atmosphere. Yeah. And so that's a real challenge to get to that prediction level. There are people working on it. It is a real challenge to get there, and our understanding of what's in the Earth has to get much better before we can get to that prediction stage.
So we're not close to it?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Austin Holland is with the Oklahoma Geological Survey. We'll have more on earthquakes in Oklahoma right after this.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We're back on The Verdict, learning more about earthquakes. Austin Holland is with the Oklahoma Geological Survey.
Austin, I know you deal in Oklahoma, of course, but are you limited in any way, either by statute or practically, to the state borders, or can your work extend beyond the state borders? I'm sure earthquakes don't stop at the state line. What kind of geographic limitations do you have?
So we really don't have any real geographic limitations. Our instruments actually record earthquakes from around the country and around the world that are significant. We share our data in real time with the USGS, and then also share it with researchers working around the world. We can do research outside of Oklahoma, but right now things are so busy that we are pretty much focused on Oklahoma research.
One other question, Mick, and then I want to defer to you. Are other states, are they blessed with a geological survey like Oklahoma is, or is your organization unique?
Most states have a geological survey of one type or another.
Yeah.
Ours is a very strong, well-recognized survey.
Probably the only one that's created by Constitution.
Yes.
I have a term in my notes, triggered seismicity. What is that?
So it's often referred to also as induced seismicity, depending on who's talking about it. But it occurs when we have these critically stressed faults. So these faults with a lot of pressure on them, they're ready to have an earthquake, but just not quite there yet. And so then triggered seismicity is when the conditions inside the earth change enough that that fault can slip and cause an earthquake. And so that can happen through natural processes. So earthquakes can trigger other earthquakes. There are other natural processes as well that can trigger these earthquakes on these critically stressed faults. But in addition, we know that there are several man-made causes that can change the conditions within the subsurface and trigger seismicity. And so some of the examples are reservoir-induced seismicity, where we impound a reservoir and we see earthquakes begin to start up. Mining, when we remove a lot of rock material, we can cause earthquakes. And then also from fluid injection at depth within the earth can also cause earthquakes.
Through 2 or 3 of the earthquakes have occurred when I was in an above ground floor, the 20th floor of a building or the 3rd floor of a building. It seemed more pronounced of being above surface level. Is that just my imagination, or is there something to that?
No, there's something to that. So the seismic waves that are generated during some of the bigger earthquakes tend to excite these higher story buildings. So they'll have a longer period so that they'll have more response to the earthquake waves that are passing from an earthquake, whether it's far or near. And so oftentimes when people in Oklahoma are feeling earthquakes that are right under them, they'll just experience it as a boom and a quick rattle, or they'll hear them coming sometimes. And that's actually because of the P waves that travel quick, there's a couple different types of waves that are generated, will start to interact with objects and create sound around you. And then you feel the S waves that travel a little slower, and that's what you're actually feeling. That's why you hear it first.
Have you ever been in an earthquake? Have you felt one yourself?
My most exciting experiences of feeling earthquakes came when I moved to Oklahoma. I've felt earthquakes before I moved to Oklahoma, but certainly I couldn't mistake the earthquakes I've felt in Oklahoma as passing trucks or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've felt them, and it's like, it's not really scary, but you want it to stop. I mean, it's just a little unnerving that you want the earth to settle down a little bit. And so you understand when people get some level of hysteria about earthquakes and get nervous and afraid that their house might become damaged. Is all of that relevant? Are these realistic fears, or should we just ignore what's going on in central Oklahoma?
No, I think those are realistic fears. So one important factor to reduce the stress during an earthquake is to understand what to do in an earthquake. And if you know you've prepared your home such that you're at less of a risk of being injured, that helps as well. And there's some helpful resources out there. Ready.gov/earthquakes has good information about earthquake preparedness for your home. And during an earthquake, you need to drop, cover, and hold on. And there's a website that describes that, but it's pretty straightforward. You get under a table or whatever you can and hold on to it so that it doesn't walk away from you during a large earthquake. Generally what the kind of damage we expect is damage to unreinforced masonry. So the last thing you want to do is go running out of a home and panicking in that sense. And just like in any other emergency, you want to have a preparedness kit, but you also want to keep your head and stay calm.
Now, you just said something I want to ask again about. the last thing to do is to run out of your home. You see movies and everybody's leaving the building to get out of, get away from the earthquake because they're afraid the building's going to fall on them. Is the prudent advice to the contrary?
Yes. So generally what we see in countries with good building codes is not wholesale collapse of buildings, but the brick facing falling off. So like Christchurch in New Zealand, most of the damage was actually brick coming in, and there were some structures that failed, but most of the damage was actually brick falling off of buildings, and that can obviously do some real damage to a person's head.
What kind of items would you tick off that might be on ready.gov or other places that an average Oklahoma homeowner could do to be better prepared?
So one thing is if you have heavy items hanging above your bed, which is a sort of a common practice, those, if there's an earthquake at night, will fall right on you. You don't have time to get away from it. Large, heavy bookcases in areas where you're often around are obviously warning things as well.
That may be what happened to our top row of books here, Mick. They seem to be gone, and we may have had an earthquake and not know it.
Can you get earthquake insurance, and should you?
So the insurance commissioner in Oklahoma has recommended that Oklahomans get insurance. Sometimes there's waiting periods after a significant earthquake, but yes, we can get earthquake insurance here in Oklahoma.
Does earthquake insurance, if you know, require a pre-writing inspection to make sure that they know what your home is like before they write the insurance?
I have no idea about that.
What's the, what we're sensing and what I see from news reports is this north central area, maybe slightly east of center, is seeing most of the activity right now. Is that just because I'm here in central Oklahoma and that's where it seems to be, or is that where most of the activity is taking place?
This year, most of the activity is taking place. It started in late 2013 and has continued through this year. We do see earthquakes elsewhere in the state. Certainly some of the old suspects like the Prague area and whatnot, but primarily it's the north central portion of the state. Last year we had a record number year of earthquakes. The earthquakes began to increase in late 2009 and sort of continued on this dramatic increase through 2010, 11, and 12. And then, like I said, last year we had this record number of earthquakes. And already this year we've exceeded the number of earthquakes we had last year.
Is there any correlation between how many earthquakes we have and when Mick Cornett files for re-election for mayor?
You know, that's a good question. Everybody likes to blame it on the seismologist here in the state, but you know, we'll have to look at that.
Politicians are probably to blame. What about the oil and gas industry? Is there any evidence that seems to think that activity is to blame?
There is some indication that we do have some of these earthquakes being triggered by oil and gas activities, and of course the question is, how much, and then why now? Because a lot of these activities have been going on for a very long time, about 60 years, that sort of thing. So it's important that we take the science and learn as much as we can before we start jumping to conclusions.
Is the likelihood of a significant California quake enough to keep you from moving there, or to discourage a child or relative of yours from moving there?
You know, it's, I used to live next to the Yellowstone supervolcano, and that's just as much of this sort of smoking gun.
Yeah.
I'm excited about geologic hazards. I'd like to experience some of them. Most people maybe don't look at it that way. So, you know, I certainly would never recommend to people to not follow some opportunity because of a fear. We know that, you know, these large earthquakes can happen, and in California, as you mentioned, they're overdue, but they're still low likelihood events.
Austin Holland is with the Oklahoma Geological Survey. Thanks very much for coming on The Verdict.
Thank you.
I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers at home have as well.
I know you're busy.
We'll be back with the final word after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad. We are a very conservative family, and we believe in old-fashioned family values. We have a loving home there, and we love kids, and we have 5, 6 of our own. And but I had no idea we were going to go into adoption, but it's been very gratifying.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We are wrapping up a show with Austin Holland, who's with the Oklahoma Geological Survey.
How fortuitous for Oklahoma that we could get a real expert in this area to join us back in 2010 and be ready to hit the ground running and work on the problems we have here in Oklahoma on earthquakes. I mean, it's really fortunate we've got somebody with his credentials, his background, his experience to help us deal with some of these problems.
Science is advancing. He acts like Oklahoma's doing all the proactive things necessary to measure them, but he also admitted that it's not like meteorology where we're getting better and better at prediction. We're pretty much following when it comes to earthquakes, and we're measuring them and then studying them.
Yeah, we tell them, look out for an earthquake, it just happened to us. That's about all we can do.
We have some website information. If I assume many of you would like to have more information about all the earthquakes that are taking place in Austin's work, you can contact his website at www.ogs.ou.edu. That's ogs.ou.edu. And we have a website as well. We'd love for you to go onto our website and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a topic you'd like to see us discuss. Our website information is theverdict.tv. That's theverdict.tv. Again, our thanks to Austin Holland with the Oklahoma Geological Survey for coming on our show and telling us more about all the earthquakes that we've been feeling in Oklahoma and north central Oklahoma, and hopefully relieving some fears along the way.
Well, yes, and remember, stay inside.
That's right. That's what Austin said. We will see you next week on another edition of The Verdict. I'll see you then.